Santa Cruz is one of the biggest beach town destinations in the United States, and the top attraction in the city is the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk. This park does a lot of things well, and in this video I want to tell you everything you need to know before visiting this place, and then we'll decide if it's the best park in Northern California. Safe to say, Santa Cruz has been around a long time. This park originally opened all the way back in 1907. Over the years, this park has done a really nice job of mixing their old classic attractions with new modern ones. For example, looking at their coasters, Giant Dipper is a classic Woody that opened in 1924, and then they have a kiddie coaster, and Undertow, which is a modern spinning coaster that opened in 2013. The park is pretty small, it only covers 24 acres, and the layout is pretty simple, but it's important to know where the major attractions are. Assuming you walk through the main front entrance, the first thing you're going to be met with is a few flat rides, and the first coaster is going to be Undertow. To the right is Neptune's Kingdom, which has indoor mini golf and an arcade, but if you turn left, you're going to have the rest of the park that direction. It's basically a lawn strip. The first dark ride is Haunted Castle, and then if you continue on, you'll hit Giant Dipper. Then, if you keep going, in the corner of the park, you have this section that's lower from the rest of the park, and this is where you're going to find rides at Cave Train, Ghost Blasters, Wipeout, and the Log Flume. The layout is pretty simple to remember. As I said a moment ago, it forms a lawn strip, and if it helps, it goes along the ocean. Now let's back it up a minute. Here are a few important notes about how to get into this park. It's pretty easy to get here, but parking is a completely different issue. If you don't arrive early, then you're probably going to have to go pretty far away, because even on the day when we visited where it wasn't too busy, the main lots did fill up. It's also worth noting that we parked in the main lot closest to the front entrance, and it cost $20 to park, and honestly, I've seen worse. Now, another important to note is the admission cost itself. The admission cost varies depending on your interests. This park is free to enter, and that ties into the third item that I wanted to mention, the fact that there's 5 entry and exit points. This does make it pretty convenient to go from the pier or the beach and then pop into the boardwalk to do a ride or two. Speaking of which, there are 2 ways you can experience rides while you're at the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk. Number 1, you could purchase individual ride tickets, which will be loaded onto a card. On your card, you will have points. Each point is worth $1. From there, rides cost anywhere from $5 to $8, and if you're only doing the coasters and or dark rides, I can see the benefit of this, or if you're just popping in to do one attraction, but otherwise I would recommend the wristband. The wristband costs anywhere from $40 to $70, and it is worth noting that you will save a bunch of money. I believe it's up to $20 if you buy these online, so don't hesitate to do so. Before you go on each attraction, you'll scan either your wristband or your card depending on which method of pay you use, and it works pretty well. So when it comes to Santa Cruz, how should you tour this park? I think it depends on your interests, but assuming you want to do most of the major attractions, here are some of the ones you should hit early in the day. Giant Dipper is one of, if not the park's most popular attractions, and also one of its best, so try to do that early in the day if you can. One thing I want to note about the queue for Giant Dipper is that the indoor queue doesn't have much space, so even if the outdoor queue is fully filled, it's probably only about a 35-minute wait. Another attraction I recommend doing early is Haunted Castle for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's one of the best rides in the park, like Giant Dipper, and number 2, the small vehicles make this line move slowly. Finally, make sure to hit Undertow early in the day as well. This Mauer spinning coaster had the longest line that we saw during the day, for, again, probably the same 2 reasons. 1, it's a good ride, and 2, it has small vehicles. That being said, if you encounter long lines while at Santa Cruz, this is not the fault of the operators, it's simply due to demand. This park has really good operations. They run their rides to maximum capacity. The one exception I can think of is Giant Dipper. On our visit, this coaster was only running 1 train, but to be honest, because the dispatches were less than 30 seconds, the ride was still going out faster than some coasters at other parks I've seen when they're running 2 trains. Bottom line is that the operations here are quite good, and because of that, there's a lot of kinetic energy with all the rides cycling constantly. This is helped by the fact that all these rides are shoved into such a small space. They really do a good job of fitting all these attractions into just 24 acres. The use of space in this park is really impressive, and there are multiple occasions where you see them work up or down instead of out, which is really smart. I've seen this at other small parks as well, but Santa Cruz does a really good job fitting their attractions in, and the attractions they picked were good as well. It's just important to know when those attractions are going to be open. Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk is open year-round, but not all the rides are open year-round. In the cooler months and in the winter months, i.e. not times when people are going to the beach a lot, they have what they call limited rides days. I wouldn't really recommend going on these limited rides days because you're just hoping that the ride you want open will be open, and there's a good chance that it will not be. A summer weekend can get really busy, so I would think going on a summer weekday is the best opportunity to do all the rides and experience the least amount of crowds. Earlier, I mentioned what rides I would recommend hitting early in the day, and that was assuming that you were getting there early in the day. That is something I recommend. Get there at opening to experience all the rides you want to do. So let's talk about those rides. They have a lot of good ones. For the roller coaster department, they have 3. The best and oldest of the bunch is Giant Dipper. This Prior and Church coaster is nearly 100 years old, and it's amazing that it's running as well as it is. Sure, it has a few jerky moments, but I think the other parts of this ride overshadow that. It's got a few spots of good airtime, especially if you sit in the back row. Not crazy ejector or anything, but solid floater if nothing else. Then there are a couple good moments of laterals mixed throughout the layout as well. It may not be glass smooth, but for how old this coaster is, I think Santa Cruz has done an incredible job keeping this ride running how it is. This is smoother than some modern wooden coasters, to be honest. Additionally, I really like the paint scheme. The white supports and then the red on the side of the track really pops. One final note about this National Historic Landmark would be the fact that you actually take your bags with you on Giant Dipper. This may surprise first-time riders, but it definitely speeds up those ops. The park's newest coaster is Undertow. Real quick, I want to note that because you can't have any loose articles in the station, you're forced to put your belongings in cubbies right before you enter the station. These cubbies are double-sided, so when you exit the ride, you get your stuff from the other side. This is actually a very smart system, and I wish more parks implemented something like this. As for the ride itself, I thought it was pretty fun. The biggest pro about this coaster is how smooth it is. Unlike the aforementioned Giant Dipper, this coaster is comfortable throughout, and it's a great family coaster. The most thrilling element by far would be that first drop. If you take this drop backwards, that is definitely the best way to experience it. Forwards is still fun, but backwards definitely adds more thrill. Other than that, I don't think there's another really good moment outside of maybe the horseshoe turn halfway through the ride. This coaster's footprint is small, but Maurer did a good job fitting a bunch of maneuvers in. Overall, it's a very enjoyable family coaster. Speaking of family coasters, the park's smallest coaster is Sea Serpent. This looks like a really nice kids coaster as it has a little bit of terrain usage and some really nice landscaping. I didn't end up getting this credit because I wasn't going to wait 30 minutes for it, which unfortunately was the line when we went over there, but ultimately it looks like one of the better kids coasters that I've seen. So while this park's coaster lineup isn't big, I think it's very solid, and there isn't a bad ride here. One ride type that they do much better than you might think is the dark ride department. This park surprisingly has 3 of them, plus a haunted walkthrough, but that isn't included with the wristband. The best of the 3 in my opinion is Haunted Castle, which as you may expect is a tour of a haunted castle. Outside of that, this ride doesn't really have a story, but I really enjoyed it. It's decently long, and there's a couple nice effects throughout the experience. They use screens in parts, but it is mostly physical set space, which is nice to see from a dark ride because those seem to be going out of style. I think if I had to pick a ride at the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk that impressed me the most, I would choose Haunted Castle. The scenes are nicely fleshed out, and while there are a few jump scares, I wouldn't call this ride scary. That being said, if you are a first-time rider, then there is a good chance that you'll jump a few times. Another fun dark ride is Ghost Blasters. From the outside, I thought this was going to be a pretty cheesy ride, and while it does have some cheesy elements, it was better than I expected it to be. I do wish the ride had some more animatronics, but the 2D sets are consistent, so it works. The part that makes this ride work is the effects and how things react when you shoot them, and when I was there, most of those seemed to be working. All that to say, this is a decent dark ride. The park's final dark ride is probably the quirkiest, and that would be none other than Cave Train Adventure. Now this was a ride that was cheesy in my opinion. You can go under the boardwalk to see the cave people that live under there, and they do all sorts of things under there. You're probably actually going to need a few rides to see everything on Cave Train because there is a lot to look at. Overall, while this isn't one of the best dark rides out there, I do appreciate its strangeness. Moving on to water rides, Santa Cruz only has one, probably because the ocean is literally right there, but it is a decent one in the Logger's Revenge Log Flume. This log flume has got to have some of the best views of any water ride on Earth because the views of the ocean are really neat. Then while the final plunge isn't elite for log flume standards, it is pretty big and you do have some good zip on it. I love log flumes, they're one of my favorite ride types. I just wish this one was longer because after the lift hill you only have a few turns before that drop. The flat ride department is probably where this park does best. They have tons, all different shapes, all different sizes. Now there were a few major flats that I did not get to experience. Let's start with the Zamperla Disco Shockwave. I imagine the views, mixed with the spinning and the weightlessness, makes this a fun flat ride. That being said, the line was just a little too long to justify a ride. A similar statement can be said about Fireball, which is the park's Frisbee. This ride seems to have some good airtime, maybe some positive G's on the swings, and some good views of Giant Dipper, which is right next door. I also didn't have time to try this park's carousel, which is kind of a shame because it's a National Historic Landmark and still has a brass ring that riders can reach for. One flat ride that I liked way more than I thought I would was Wipeout. This is an indoor flat ride, and it's insane. I'm sure this ride would be fun outdoors, but it really is the setting that makes this ride. The lights and the music elevate it to a whole new level. And if you're getting nauseated watching this, don't worry. This flat ride is much less nauseating when you're actually on it, which is a relief. Overall, it's easy to miss this ride because it's tucked in the corner, but don't, because this is one of the park's best flats and my personal favorite. If you want to get a good view, one of your best shots is Double Shot. This S&S drop tower is 125 feet tall, which makes it the tallest ride in the park. In addition to the view, the forces are good too. The initial launch has some kick to it, and then the airtime at the top of said launch is good. Then, at each valley, you get a little bit of positive G's. I really enjoyed this one between the launch, the view, and the airtime. If you prefer hang time over airtime, one of, if not your best bet in the park for that, is Typhoon. The airtime on this is just nuts. You hang upside down for such an incredibly long time. Another one I didn't end up doing was Rocco Plane. I've heard you can get some crazy flips and crazy hang time on this flat ride. Other than those rides, I think this park has a very solid flat ride collection, and I would argue the best in Northern California. Moving on to one final attraction, and that would be the Sky Gliders. This sky ride takes you down the length of the boardwalk and provides some really neat views. From a transportation standpoint, walking is probably faster, especially if it's not too busy, but it's more relaxing on the sky ride and it gives your feet a little bit of a break if nothing else. Plus, on certain gondolas, they've placed cavemen, which is just a quirky and charming touch that you don't usually see. If you're definitely scared of heights, maybe don't do this attraction, but if you're okay with heights, then I definitely recommend it. It gives a nice view, it gives your feet a break, and it's a relaxing experience. Plus, if you like taking photos, it's a great place. Overall, this park's ride lineup is really impressive, and I think the area that is most impressive is those dark rides. The fact that a boardwalk park has 3 separate dark rides is awesome. Plus, just about anyone can ride these in comparison to a coaster or flat ride. Another area that Santa Cruz excels in is the food department. This was much better than I was anticipating, even though I'd heard they had some good offerings. I got a Philly cheesesteak for dinner, and that was delicious. There are also many other good food locations throughout the boardwalk. If your interests aren't in rides or food, don't forget about Neptune's Kingdom, which I mentioned earlier. In here you can find an arcade and indoor mini golf, which looks to be a pretty cool mini golf course. Also, the Laughing Sal animatronic is horrifying, but it is worth seeing. Now let's talk about merchandise. Merchandise at Santa Cruz is commonplace, and you're going to find a lot of similar things with the Santa Cruz logo, but there are some ride-specific merchandise throughout the park too. I was able to get a Giant Dipper shirt, and heck, they had a shirt for their kiddie coaster Sea Serpent, which I thought was funny. The merch department is solid here. So overall, that pretty much does it for the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, but I wanted to compare it to the other Northern California theme parks. We're going to go through these categories pretty fast, but I want to throw out a few things that I think Santa Cruz does better than CGA and Six Flags Discovery Kingdom, and those would be operations, merchandise, food, and most importantly, dark rides. To be honest, I also think this park is cleaner, which is super impressive considering it's located right next to a beach. Between the three, the flat ride department is probably about equal, and since I haven't really been on any flats at CGA or Discovery Kingdom because we prioritize roller coasters, I can't really say for sure. In some ways, I might argue Santa Cruz just because they have some of the more unique flats like Wipeout and then the classic carousel. Roller coasters is interesting because Discovery Kingdom has Joker, which is my #1 overall coaster at the moment, and CGA has Railblazer, which is one of my favorites as well. The problem though is that both of those parks have a bunch of dud coasters. Boomerang, Con, Demon, and probably Grizzly all aren't very good. Santa Cruz on the other hand doesn't have a dud coaster. So when putting all these things together, is the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk the best park in Northern California? Right now, I think it is. Everything from the ride offerings, the food, the operations is done really well here. Plus the location right next to the ocean is pretty much unbeatable. So those are my thoughts on the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk in Santa Cruz, California. But now I want to hear from you. What is your favorite ride at the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, and what do you think of this park if you've had an opportunity to visit it? Also, real quick, I want to say thank you all for 1,000 subscribers. It's been a long time coming, and it's been really cool to see this channel grow. But with all those things being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.